It feels strange, sitting here, talking to a camera, for so long. My voice was just a whisper in my own home. But I need to speak up now. Not just for me, but for anyone who feels silenced. My story starts, like many others, a fairy tale. I met him, and he was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, attentive, the kind of man who makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. We got married, and soon after, my beautiful son, Leo, was born. He was my entire world from the moment I held him, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I knew a love I had never imagined. Those early days were a blur of happiness, but slowly, like a shadow creeping in at dusk, things started to change. It wasn't one big event. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. A comment about what I was wearing. A scoff at my opinions. A demand to know where I was every second of the day. He'd say it was because he loved me so much. Because he worried. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The man I loved was still there, just buried under this new layer of control and anger. He started isolating me. First, it was my friends. He'd find reasons for me to cancel plans, complain they were a bad influence, or create an argument right before I was supposed to leave. So I stopped seeing them. It was just easier. Then, it was my family. A phone call with my mom would end with him interrogating me about what we talked about, twisting my words, accusing me of complaining about him. The calls became shorter, less frequent until they barely happened at all. I was on an island, and he was the only other inhabitant. My world shrank until it was just the three of us. Him, me, and our sweet little Leo. Leo was my lifeline. His laughter was the only music that could drown out the constant tension. His hugs were my only solace. I poured all my love, all my energy into him. I read him stories. We built forts out of blankets. We had dance parties in the living room. In those moments, I could almost forget the fear that lived in the pit of my stomach. I could pretend we were a normal, happy family. But the pretense would always shatter. If Leo was too loud, if he made a mess, my husband's temper would flare. He never laid a hand on Leo, but the shouting, the anger directed at me in front of our son, it was just as damaging. I saw the fear in Leo's eyes, saw him flinch when his father's voice got loud. He started to walk on eggshells, just like I did. A 5-year-old shouldn't have to learn that. The day everything broke is seared into my memory. It was a stupid argument, something about dinner being a few minutes late. But his rage was different this time. It was cold, calculated. He looked at me and said the words that stopped my heart. "You're an unfit mother. I'm going to make sure you never see him again." I thought it was just another threat, another way to hurt me. But the next day, while I was at a doctor's appointment, he had insisted I go to alone. He packed a bag for himself and Leo, and they were gone. The silence in the house was deafening. His toys were still on the floor. His little jacket was hanging by the door. But he was gone. My husband had vanished, taking my son, my entire reason for living with him. Panic set in. I called his phone. Ober and ober. No answer. I called his family, his friends. They all said they didn't know where he was, their voices cold and distant. I realized with dawning horror that he had spent months, maybe years, laying the groundwork for this. He had been telling them his own twisted version of our life, painting me as unstable, as a bad mother. He had isolated me so perfectly that when he finally took my son, there was no one I could turn to who would believe me. The legal battle that followed was a nightmare. He used my isolation against me. She has no friends, his lawyer would say. Her own family is distant. She's unstable. He twisted my every action, every tear, into proof of his narrative. He had the money, the resources, the network of people who believed his lies. I had nothing but a broken heart and a desperate, primal need to get my son back. The court granted him temporary custody, citing my emotional state and lack of a support system. The very system he had systematically destroyed. I was allowed supervised visits, an hour at a time, in a cold, sterile room with a stranger watching my every move. Seeing Leo during those visits was both the best and worst hour of my week. He would run into my arms, but he was different. He was quieter, more subdued. He'd look over his shoulder at the supervisor, as if he was afraid of doing something wrong. He told me his dad said I was sick, and that's why we couldn't live together. My own son was being taught to fear me, to pity me. My husband was not just stealing my son from me. He was stealing my son's memory of me. He was poisoning the purest love I had ever known. I almost gave up. The weight of it all, the injustice, the loneliness, it was crushing. I would sit in Leo's empty room and just exist. But one day, during a visit, Leo whispered something in my ear. He said, "I miss our dance parties, Mommy." And in that moment, a fire lit inside me. He still remembered the joy, the love, the mamayos before she was buried under fear and grief. He was still in there, and I would fight for him until my last breath. That whisper was my turning point. I started to fight back, not with rage, but with resolve. I found a support group for women who had survived domestic abuse. For the first time in years, I was in a room full of people who understood. They didn't just believe me. They had lived their own versions of my story. They helped me find a new lawyer, one who specialized in cases involving coercive control. I started meticulously documenting everything, every threat, every lie, every instance of manipulation I could remember. I reached out to my family, to my old friends, and I told them the whole truth, no matter how hard it was. It was a slow process, but piece by piece, I began to rebuild the support system he had taken from me. The court battle was long and grueling. It felt like my entire life was being dissected under a microscope. But this time I wasn't alone. My lawyer was incredible. She brought in experts on psychological abuse. My friends and family testified on my behalf. We presented a mountain of evidence that showed the pattern of control, the isolation, the manipulation. We weren't just fighting for custody. We were exposing the truth of what had been happening behind closed doors for years. I'll never forget the day the judge read the final verdict. When he said the words "full custody is awarded to the mother," I couldn't even process it. I just started crying, this deep, soul-shaking sob of relief. It was over. The fight was over. Later that day, I didn't go to a supervised visitation center. I went to Leo's school to pick him up. When he saw me standing there, his face broke into the biggest, most beautiful smile I had ever seen. He just ran, and I knelt down and caught him, and we just held each other for what felt like forever. He was home. We were home. Rebuilding our life hasn't been easy. There are still scars. Leo is in therapy, and so am I. We are learning to navigate our new reality, to heal from the trauma, but we do it together. We have dance parties in the living room again. We build bigger, better blanket forts. His laughter fills our home, and it's the most beautiful sound in the world. I'm sharing this story not for pity, but for the person out there who might be feeling as alone and silenced as I did. Your voice matters. Your story is real. Coercive control and psychological abuse are real, and they are devastating. If you are in a situation like this, please know that you are not alone, and there is help. Reaching out is the first, bravest step. It was the step that saved me and brought my son back to me. Thank you for listening.